what does growth and scaling mean? I would definitely separate growth from scaling. Growth usually means revenue growth to earning more money of what you make or what you provide, and hopefully keeping more, although growth doesn't necessarily mean. Scaling is something totally different. Scaling is being prepared to grow, but not stretch your resources or not be unable to fulfill that. A lot of people chase growth thinking that they make more money. Actually, earning revenue doesn't necessarily mean that you keep more of what you want.
Today, we're joined by Kendall Peterson, founder of Elemental Strategies. Kendall helps companies build long-term business health, not just growth, and has helped build $8 billion companies. Kendall, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we're going to start with the main question. You call yourself a business doctor. What do founders usually think is broken when they come to you?
Oh, there's a variety of things that are broken when people come to me. And that's actually why I use the term business doctor, because usually what I'm doing is I'm working with symptoms and not something direct. So some of the symptoms might be I'm not making enough money, my team can't get along, my turnover is too high, I can't figure out if I'm making profit, those kind of things. So I deal with the symptoms like a doctor does and then figure out what's behind it.
So what we do in this show, we try to figure out like the why behind how people like choose a certain path, obviously. So how did you get into this work in the first place? Like what struck your interest?
Well, I did not set out to be a business doctor or a consultant or anything else you want to call me. I actually started wanting to be an astronaut. I thought going to space was the most significant thing that I could do. And in my pursuit of it led me to work as a nuclear reactor operator, a commercial nuclear reactor operator, which I did for a long time. And in that company, there were a lot of problems like there are in most companies. And my natural inclination is to organize chaos or to solve problems. And so in that company, what I did is I solved problems that needed to be solved. They recognized that. They would call me the fixer, and they would move me around from department to department, fixing broken things or broken departments or broken functions. And after a significant amount of time in that company, I decided that I just kind of wanted to go out on my own, and I had a desire to make businesses work better. I had been rejected by NASA. There was no chance that I was going to be an astronaut at that point in time. So I decided to dive all in. And actually, one of the things that made me think of that was actually thinking of the space program. So it took me a couple of months to get over the fact that I had lost my chance to become an astronaut. But what I realized was in 1961, when President Kennedy stood before Congress and said, I believe this nation should dedicate itself by the end of this decade of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. What I realized is the success of the moon landing was actually predicated on a very bold, very profound, and a very direct purpose statement. And that's why 500,000 people were able to rally around putting a man on the moon. And I thought, if I could do that for an organization, if I can help them find their purpose, then they have a chance at success. And so that's how it started 20 years ago.
Wow. So tell us about essential elements and why do they matter?
The essential elements, a little throwback to my nuclear career and the fact that I studied nuclear engineering. So in nuclear engineering, you're looking at the smallest base thing that makes other things happen, right? The atoms are the smallest building block of everything that we see. The elements are a composition of various atoms that give us things like salt or give us things like the metals that we build cars out of. And so I thought when I was moving into this realm of helping organizations, what I really did is tried to figure out where are the commonalities, where are things going wrong consistently in different organizations, because if you can get to the root of it, you can more likely solve it. For example, if an organization comes to me and says, I'm not making enough money, it doesn't necessarily mean we need to start with sales or marketing, although those would be the obvious choices. What it might mean is there's something at the fundamental level of what they're doing, like service delivery, that is actually a problem. So that's where I got the elements from. And over time, over the course of 30 years of studying business and working in businesses, what I realized is there are 7 things that every successful organization does, and they're common no matter what the organization, what the industry, they are common. And so that's kind of how we get the essential elements. They are the 7 things that every successful organization does.
What are the 7?
The 7 things, they start with purpose. So that's kind of why I use the President Kennedy analogy. So every organization should have a purpose. They should understand why they're doing what they're doing. Little side note to that, if it is to make money, then that's pretty shallow and you're not likely to be successful. But most organizations have a greater purpose: to uphold a family legacy in a family organization. Or a nonprofit may have a purpose: we want there to be no homeless people sleeping on the street. So if you can get to the purpose of why an organization exists and align what they do in terms of a mission and what they want to become in terms of a vision, if you can align those things to their purpose, then they are far more likely to be successful. And I'd say 20, 30, 40 times as likely to be successful as just chasing money. So the first one is purpose. That's where we spend most of the time. Then the next 6, the first one is team. So what I define team as those people that work within the organization or adjacent to the organization. What you want is people that get it, want it, and can do it. Like, that's a real healthy organization. People that understand what you're about, understand that purpose. They want to be a part of that purpose or achieving that purpose. And they also have the technical skills. So this is a problem that most organizations run into. They hire for technical skills, but what they wind up with is people who don't get it and want it. And so they become a poison apple. So if you have a purpose in your organization and you get everybody on board to align to that purpose, you're much more likely to be successful. The next 5 are systems. What I refer to as systems, that's not necessarily technical software. That is ways of work that involves your processes, your procedures, and the systems that support those or accelerate those. Super important to have a systematic way of work. That way it's repeatable. You have a consistent outcome to what you do. So that's why systems are number 3 on the list. Number 4 on the list is measurement. You need a way of measuring whether you're successful or not. That could be financial in terms of, are we making enough revenue? It could be looking at your turnover rate, which I mentioned before. How many people are coming in and then leaving? Could be number of widgets through your assembly line. All depends on the company. But managing by fact is super important instead of just guessing at whether or not you're successful. So we have purpose, we have team, we have systems, and we have measurement. And then the last 3 are communication, making sure that you communicate your messages internally and externally very clearly so that there's no question about what you mean or what you're doing. And relationships, which is kind of a byproduct of communication. So people, everything from your employees to your shareholders, to your investors, to your customers, your clients, partners, building deep, meaningful relationships with those so that they help you toward your success. And then the last one I call innovation. And that is quite simply making sure you manage your problems and you get rid of your problems and you stay relevant in a rapidly changing business world. So those are the 7: purpose, team,
Nice.
systems, measurement, communication, relationships, and innovation.
So when you're getting into a new business, I assume you kind of do like an analysis on which of those is the weakest and you attack. Would you say that that's kind of the approach, or what is your typical approach when you start working with a new company?
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that sets us apart in the marketplace is we don't just kind of grasp at the first thing that we hear. We actually do an assessment. It's called a health assessment, and it looks at how an organization is aligned to those 7 different elements of success. If they're doing things very well, then they score high. If they're not doing things so well, they score low. And we look at that and we share that information with the leadership of the organization so that they understand. And what we're able to do is draw correlations between what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and what the results show, and where they're being affected in the assessment of those 7 essential elements. And then from there, we can draw we call it a prescription because we act as business doctors, but basically it's an action plan of which things you attack first, how you attack them, and what results you should see as a result of attacking it that way.
Very cool. And
yeah, I'm looking at your website right now, and the main headline is "Success isn't random; it follows a formula." And I believe the formula is what you just described.
Exactly right. The formula is built on the 7 essential elements.
Awesome. Sorry, Jake, or something?
Yeah, no. So I just want to hear about like some of these. You said it was a handful of billion-dollar companies that you were working with, which is super cool, consulting. And I'm just really curious, like, what were some of the biggest lessons that you've learned on just working with some of these big brands? I mean, I'm sure, there are different verticals and different industries, and I'm sure you see a lot of commonalities. And so I'm very curious, like, I've had the privilege of working for some bigger brands, but none that were billion-dollar size brands while I was working there. And I'm just really curious, like, what were some of these biggest, commonalities that you saw and big lessons that you learned along the way in your career?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, let's kind of separate a billion-dollar company from really big brands, because billion-dollar companies, I mean, they used to be big brands, but not so much anymore. So I've worked with the Fortune 500. So that would be, let's say, very big brands, those companies that are either at or around $1 billion or that we've helped grow to $1 billion. And then, less than $1 billion would be small. And I'm going to separate those just because the problems that you see are a little bit different, although, again, there's some commonality among them. So very big brands, the Fortune 500, you would be surprised at how much they suffer from some of the very same things as smaller companies. And we tend to look at them and we tend to think, wow, they've really got their act together, right? They're just doing everything right. That's how they got so big. And that's not the case. And the reason it's not the case is because they become very fragmented as they get bigger. So their departments function as smaller organizations. And that's usually where the dysfunction lies. In a smaller organization, you're able to keep your hands on all of that and everything should work together. But in a larger organization, that becomes very, very difficult. So the dysfunction that you see in those Fortune 500 is usually that disconnect or that fragmentation among departments, because they become very siloed. They do things their own way. They don't pass information off the way that you would think. So that's very, very common in the Fortune 500. And if I could be very honest, I don't like working with the Fortune 500. It's difficult to get information. It's difficult to get the information you need. It's difficult to get decisions made. It's very bureaucratic. So I tend not to work with them so much anymore. So the billion-dollar companies, they're great, right? They're aggressive. They want to be there. Their dysfunction tends to be that they start with a purpose. They start with this big, bold aspiration. And they lose sight of that because they start focusing on money, or they start focusing on investors and shareholders becoming public entities. And all of that takes away from the purpose. Why are we really doing that? For example, I had a medical device company that they wanted to change lives in the purity of the solutions that they were able to provide, so that people who were leveraging their medical devices had better quality of life than without it. That's a noble cause and it's beautiful, right? But what happened is they started chasing the dollars, and they started chasing things that took them away from that purpose, and they struggled as a result of that. So not too different, large companies from small companies. Very often it's in the aggressiveness that we chase the dollar, or so I'm going to split into two things: the aggressiveness with which we chase dollars and put money as prime, or in ego. And ego is really the kiss of death, especially as you get toward the $1 billion mark, where people think that they're great and they don't want to listen to prudence, or they don't want to listen to good counsel anymore. So that's my experience anyway.
So when you say $1 billion companies that you like to work with, that's like a huge startup, right? Compared to bureaucracy and corporate and everything else, right?
Actually, I like to work with sub $1 billion companies, and I will work with billion. And I made that my practice for a long period of time, building the $1 billion companies, because it was exciting to chase. And actually, what I realized is I was chasing money too. They pay quite well when you want to be a $1 billion company. I like the $250 million down to about $5 million. Number one, they can afford to bring somebody in like me. Not that I'm expensive, but they have a little more discretionary income. But what I love about that range of business is that they can make decisions on the spot, and then we move. And momentum is king. It's just like in sports. In football, I'm a hockey guy. So in hockey, speed is your asset, right? The faster you're moving, the more opportunities will exist for you. And the same holds true for business. You want to be able to move fast, make decisions fast, and not get bogged down in bureaucracy. So that's really the difference between big and small.
I'm also a hockey guy, so I get it.
Yeah, Jake played some hockey as well.
Good.
So
okay, so one of the questions that I like to ask, and I like to understand the perspective of the people that we have here on the podcast. So I would like to understand your perspective on growth, scaling. So what does that mean to you? Because that means different things to different people.
My first instinct to say it's a trap. So what does growth and scaling mean? I would definitely separate growth from scaling. So we'll take growth first. Growth usually means revenue growth, or becoming to earning more money, right? And that's what typically means growth. Sometimes you could look at growth as expanding territory or doing things like that, and not necessarily focused on revenue. But generally speaking, in the business world, growth means revenue. That means selling more of what you make or what you provide, and hopefully keeping more, although growth doesn't necessarily mean that. Scaling is something totally different. Scaling is being prepared to grow, but not stretch your resources, or not being unable to fulfill that growth. And they're two very, very different things, and the way you approach each is very, very different. And the reason I said it's a trap, or something that you got to be careful of, is that a lot of people chase growth thinking that they make more money, and actually earning revenue doesn't necessarily mean that you keep more of what you want. So it's a complicated discussion, and I'm sure I convoluted it in my answer to you, but that's how I look at growth and scaling.
It's really interesting you say that. We have a client that recently wanted to scale up to $1 million a month revenue, and when we came on, they were doing $250K a month, and it was really interesting as a process to try to quote unquote scale them up, because at the end of the month, although we didn't hit the full million, but we hit like $750,000, and the revenue was huge, but the profit was actually surprisingly less than what we had hit a couple of months prior, where it was we still had a great month, don't get me wrong, but it's very interesting to see. This was really interesting on our end to see how growth doesn't necessarily mean more money in your pocket by any means. And and it was such a more complicated operation when we were scaling within a month from doing 250K in a month to 750K in a month. We needed a lot more setters. We needed a lot more closers. We needed more coaching staff. We needed a lot more volume of ads. There was a lot of stuff. And then we didn't have all of the systems super dialed. So things were sort of breaking a little bit, which really affected our return on ad spend. And so it was a very interesting lesson for us. You know, I've scaled e-com brands in the past, and e-com also can have its challenges when it comes to operations and inventory and fulfillment. But usually it's not as much because it is a scalable product that you just need more of. And so long as you have supply, you should be fine. With a coaching business such as the client that we had, it was more work that needed to get done, and then a lot more work on the selling. So it was like more work all across the board, and it made the business a lot more complicated. And it kind of showed the lesson that scaling too aggressive and too prematurely without having things super dialed isn't really always the move by any means. I mean, sometimes it can be, and sometimes we've hit insanely, good months by doing that. But if the business isn't necessarily ready, it can be definitely taxing on the business. And, we've definitely reverted, where the founder reverted some hiring and let go of some people that we brought on and really reduced the team again. And it was, it's very interesting to see there's so much buzz around the word scaling. And hey, our company, our podcast is Scaling Adventures. So we're obviously all about scaling. We want to scale, but not always is scaling the correct decision at any given time by any means.
Well, you bring up a great point, Jake. At the end of the day, the more informed you are when you make that decision, because I'll be honest, like, it sounds great. I want to be bigger. I want to make more money. It sounds great, right? But when you look at what it takes to do that, I'll give you another example. So I work a lot with nonprofit organizations. So it's not so much about, we want to make more revenue. Usually it's about, we want a broader reach. So I work with an organization that serves a population that they wanted to double that population. So it involved building a new building. So now they ran off and they started building a new building, and they were super excited, and, we're going to be able to double our capacity. But as you start having those conversations after the fact, unfortunately, you start looking at, not only does it mean you need more people, but it means a level of complexity that the organization is really going to be challenged with handling, right? At least if you're increasing revenue, sometimes you can afford those things. But you really need to have, and this is where aligning to your purpose really matters, right? Does it serve our purpose to be bigger? Does it serve our purpose to do all of the things? We commonly use the expression putting more sausage through the sausage maker, right? Well, that's great. But if you need 3 sausage makers to do what you're talking about, and 3 sausage maker operators and more electricity and all of those things, is it worth it? Does it help you fulfill your purpose? Those are the conversations that we like to have in our organization, because you may decide that something scaled back makes more sense. And if you do that ahead of time, it's a whole lot less pain than if you do it after the fact.
Yeah, or removing things entirely. I mean, I know that Elon is a huge fan of, efficiency and elimination. And one of his core principles is you should be almost removing more than you're adding. You should just be moving. Why is this here? Let's just keep things as bare bones as possible before ever scaling. And it makes sense because a lot of systems can bloat things, and it's interesting when you're in the actual business trying to grow and seeing how operationally there's some marketing is ready, the ads are converting, we're ready to go, but You look on the back end, it's going to be a problem if we continue at this rate. You know, very, very interesting to think about. So yeah.
Kendall, have you worked with software companies before?
Software, yes, I have. Actually,
I'm interested in
4 or 5 of the $8 billion companies were software or tech companies.
Wow.
I'm interested in your perspective. I don't know if we've told you about, we're launching some software soon. Okay. And I want to know, like, you've seen like multiple companies. What are the different like stages and the changes that a company goes through from like ideation to scaling, and what happens when they scale from like 1 million to 10 to 100? Like, how does like the composition change?
Composition changes radically, and I think you bring up a very important point, right? There's what you call the order of tens. For whatever reason, $1 million company operates very differently than a $10 million company. And then the next order of magnitude at $100 million company, it operates very differently, and then billion and so on. I don't 100% know why that is, but that tends to be the case. Sometimes it's 950,000 to 1.1 million, but generally speaking, those are the benchmarks. What tends to happen is that those organizations just become more complex, and by complex, they're doing more, they're interacting more. And so as you scale from a very small company to a larger company and you go through those revenue benchmarks, what tends to happen is that's where your systems, your processes, procedures, and the tools that you use become very, very important, along with communication. Because as different people get involved, as you expand the pool of people that are involved in doing whatever it is that you're doing, what suffers first is the communication. This person doesn't talk to that person. This department doesn't talk to that department. This function doesn't talk to that function. And there are misses. There are things that need to happen that don't happen because people just don't know. And through no fault of their own. It's not like they're saying, whatever you do, don't talk to those people. It's just that you're so busy, right? And typically you're running lean and there's only a few number of people, and you work a 12, 14, 16-hour day every day, and you just don't think, oh, I need to let so-and-so know that this is happening. So that's what I see like all across that scaling process, is that communication and the ways of work just don't scale with it. And you need somebody to keep an eye on that. You need somebody to make sure that the interaction across the entire organization is happening. That's usually more or less what your COO type function would be doing. Could be a different role, but if you think about it, every company has 3 main functions, right? Sales and marketing, operations, and finance. And those functions are at odds with each other, because sales and marketing wants to spend a bunch of money so they can go out and drive sales, right? Because that's their function. Finance does not want them to spend money to go out and drive sales. But they also want the money to come in, so they're conflicted in whether or not you spend money, but they agree to it. And operations is sitting there saying, wait, you sell more. I actually have to deliver this stuff, for crying out loud. Why don't you check in with me? So slow it down or stop selling stuff that I can't deliver. And that's that little conundrum that you get into. Operations then, in order to fulfill greater sales, needs more money because they need to grow with people or equipment or whatever you're doing, right? More storage, whatever. They need to spend more money, but finance doesn't want to spend more money because they're already spending money on sales and marketing. So they get in an argument with finance to say, I need money and you won't let us have money. So that's where those 3 functions just kind of break down. And if you have an overlay, somebody that can make sure that they're talking to each other, that the rationale is thought through. Yes, we need to spend money, but here's the benefit of that money. And then everybody starts to understand what all 3 are doing. That's actually a formal process called integrated business planning, or IBP, sometimes called SNOP, or sales and operations planning. It's where you look at what you sell and you make sure that you've got a catalog or a service portfolio that can sustain the revenue you want. And then you go to your sales team and say, okay, this is what you have to sell. Let's make sure there's demand. And if there's not demand in the market, how do we drive demand? That's the function of marketing, so that you can actually meet your financial objectives. And then you're also talking to your operations team to say, hey, this is the goal for the company. This revenue means you're going to be doing X plus Y plus Z. So make sure you're prepared. And then all three of those functions are talking to each other. That's an overly simplistic description of what it takes, but the disconnect in scaling from 1 million to 10 million to 100 million to billion is that those three functions don't talk to each other. So the more effort you put into that, the more successful you'll be.
So it's a main issue of coordination, as I see it.
100%.
Just need to keep them working together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because it becomes fragmented over time, and it just creates all kinds of problems.
So, quick question in terms of communication. I know that, again, I'll go back to Elon. It talks a lot about, like, having no managerial, hierarchy. So being able to basically communicate with anyone. And I am really curious on seeing how these organizations you've worked with that have scaled up. I heard, there was another, I think it was not 0 to 1. I think maybe Ready, Aim, Fire was the book. And it spoke about how when you're growing, you can only have like 7 people to report down to, 7 people to communicate with on a day-to-day basis that report to you. And then that branches out, and then that branches out. And I'm curious, like, what do you see as the best style of communication in these organizations? Do you believe in something of like what Elon believes in, which is, there really is no hierarchy. You can message me at any time if it's urgent enough. And how does that kind of work with what you're talking about now, where, you're kind of playing whack-a-mole to make sure each of these teams are in congruency? Where does all this kind of fit in? Because obviously, I'm a big believer as well, where sales, marketing, and operations, it's really important for that feedback loop to be on tandem, not just so that you guys know for marketing's sake, spending, okay, but really for, lead quality for our coaching businesses that we work with, and we're running paid ads. I need to know from the setter team and from the closer team, what is lead quality? We have to be communicating. And if we're also not communicating with the operations, it's not as smooth as an onboarding, sales, and marketing process. And so I know that, the Hormozis speak a lot about, you should have the like a team call every week or on some sort of cadence with those main departments. I'm just curious, what are some things that you've seen, that you've implemented, that have really helped to get communication really tight, so that these things it's not playing whack-a-mole. It really is a healthy means of communication as you scale up a business.
Yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. First of all, I would say that even Elon Musk's organization has an organizational structure. There are people who work and they report up to somebody who reports up to somebody. It's not an entirely flat organization with 50,000 people in it all reporting to Elon Musk. Yeah. That's just completely dysfunctional.
That makes no sense. Exactly. No.
It was a great management philosophy in the 90s that we need flat organizations. It just doesn't work, right? It works to a certain degree. Now, do you need 57 layers with all kinds of roadblocks in it? No, you don't. And there's a happy medium. One of the things, there's a couple of things that I really want to say about this. I'm very, very passionate about exactly what you were talking about. There are a ton of books that denounce organizational structure, right? There's another whole set of books that promote it. Those are people selling books, right? Those are people selling methodologies. What I will tell you in my observation of what works, this is what works. You have to have some level of organization. What you were talking about in what was it, Ready, Aim, Fire, or Ready, Fire, Aim, whatever, I don't remember the name of the book, but what you were talking about there is called span of control. And in span of control, and this is actually something that military, firefighters, police officers, any kind of organizational structure that requires a certain discipline, they use what's called span of control. That is between 3 and 7, optimally 5. That's how many people you can effectively interact with, share information with, give instructions to, receive feedback from. That's what you can do. So one of the things I look at when I see a CEO with 12 direct reports, or any other leader with a lot of direct reports that are trying to be flat, they're just not functional. They're not giving somebody the right amount of time, the right enough care, the right enough feeding. So if you set up an organization that has that proper span of control, then that helps you toward that. The other part of it is leadership sets the tone. At the end of the day, I don't care what book you read. I don't care what manifesto you believe in. Leadership sets the tone. So if you want your organization to communicate, your leaders need to communicate, and they need to emphasize the importance of communication. If you want your organization to work hard, your leadership needs to work hard, and they need to set the tone that working hard is how we're going to be successful. And I'm going to run it right back to the 7 essential elements. Purpose and setting purpose is one of the most important things you can do, because what you want your organization to communicate from the top of the top to the bottom of the bottom is how important what you're doing is, how what you're doing on a daily basis fits into that purpose. And I'm going to go back to the space program. Why? Because I love it. So bear with me here. But President Kennedy, after he made that bold proclamation that we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, what he did was profound. He went to all of the facilities where they made rocket engines, where they made space capsules, where they made jet fuel, where they tested everything, all of tons of different locations. He spent a considerable amount of time going to those locations, interacting with the people, even though they didn't report directly to him, and making sure they knew what they were doing was important and how they fit into the bigger picture. And there's an anecdotal story. I don't know if it's true, but it's a great story, and it exemplifies what I'm talking about. So President Kennedy allegedly was sitting at Cape Canaveral. He's in the lunchroom with all of the engineers, and he's letting the engineers know how important what their work is. And he sees the janitor making his way through the lunchroom, pushing a mop cart. So he gets up and he runs over there to the janitor and he goes, "Hi, my name is John. What's your name?" And the janitor says, "My name is Larry." And you could see his name on his shirt. It was Larry, right? He goes, "Larry, what do you do here?" Even though he's pushing a mop bucket and you could tell what he does, he goes, "What do you do here?" And Larry stands up proudly and says, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." And the story is that Larry understood, even though he cleans the lunchroom and he cleans the bathrooms and he makes sure the paper towels are full, that if he didn't do those things, he was jeopardizing the mission of putting a man on the moon. And if you apply that thinking to any part of your organization, and we used to have this saying in the nuclear industry that I worked in the company I worked for, how much would your customers be willing to pay for what you're doing right now? Like, that's how important that is, right? To have a connection to the importance of what you're doing, not just, I think I'm important because I exist, but I'm important because if I don't do what I do, then so-and-so can't do what they need to do, and it puts the broader mission in jeopardy. I think that's far more important than what the hierarchy looks like or how many people report to you. you're going to figure out in your organization what's important. Every organization is a little bit different. Every leader is a little bit different. But what is important is that your leaders need to understand that they need to be nurturing and feeding their people in such a way that those people understand that the role they play is important. And if you can't articulate how important that is, then that person's probably not that important.
So, Kendall, speaking to businesses that are listening to this right now, what size business and what are some of the symptoms of a business that are a clear, obvious sign that they should probably have a conversation with somebody like you, because there's some inefficiencies that they should get ironed out to make their business or organization a lot more effective?
Yeah, it's a good question. I generally what I say is, as a business owner or a business leader, if you're not at peace with what you're doing, then there's something you need to resolve. And that's my general rule of thumb. And I experience it in my own business too. Sometimes I'm peaceful, we're chugging along, and I know that we're good. And then there's something like, man, it doesn't feel right, or I know it's not right, or I'm not making enough money. And so we actually term those as solution pathways in our business. That's how we approach things, from the problem mindset. So if a business leader they feel like they're not making as much money as they should be given their current structure, if their team is not getting along, if they've got a leader that is not leading and getting the results that they want, if they have high turnover in multiple positions or one position, if they're not able to clearly pass information from one end of the organization to the next, or if the leader is completely blindsided by something frequently, then those are all of the things that, that's not all of the things, but those are many of the things that we deal with. And those are many of the things that a leader should work out within their organization, because those things are symptoms of much larger problems.
Sure. And Kendall, how can people watching reach you if they want to learn more about you?
Well, I mean, the easiest way is my website, elementalstrat.com. So that's one way. You can find me on LinkedIn. A quick search of Elemental Strategies will kind of pull up every way that you can get us. But that's a general way. And what I'd like to point out here is, working with me doesn't mean it costs you a lot of money. That's a big misconception because of the way the consulting industry works. We do a lot for free. We give a lot of information, a lot of guidance without ever having to pay anything. We talk to business owners all the time, just to help get them unstuck and give them a little guidance to where they can do things on their own.
Amazing.
I have one last question. So,
okay.
Talking about how important communication is, and this is kind of something that we tried, knowing that we try to automate as much as possible and just make it as efficient as possible. So my first question is, like a CEO, CTO, or COO, like how many direct connections is there like a number or a range that they should have? That's my first question. My second question is, we automated like a lot of the messages, and most of them were reminders to do things based on the SOPs. So like at a certain time, those just the team members become kind of numb to those messages. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So like what's a way to optimize like communication without really making it robotic?
Boy, that if you can solve that, Raheem, then you're going to be a billionaire there. So let me hit the first thing first. And we actually covered it a little earlier, but that's called span of control. So how many you should have depends on the functions and the functional structure. I can generalize, but the number that you're looking for, you should have somewhere between 3 and 7 direct reports. Any less than 3, you got to question whether or not you need a leader in that function. And any more than 7, you just simply can't give them enough attention or time. The important part of that is to understand the role and the function of a leader. And I'm going to go military on you here, and I'm going to go West Point. West Point trains leaders in a very special way and a very profound way. Their mindset is that leadership is 10% setting the direction that you're taking the organization. It is 10% setting the pace that you move in that direction. And the remaining 80% is nurturing the people in your care to make sure they can accomplish what you set out to accomplish. So through that lens, what I'm saying is, if you have more than 7 people, you're not going to be able to do the 80% effectively of your job, which is to nurture them, to understand them, to see where they're struggling, to see what personal problems they have going on in their life that is keeping them from being fully present, from anticipating the needs of the future organization. So that's where that span of control becomes very, very important. Less than 3, you're not really needed. More than 7, you're not really functional. So that's the guidance on that. Now, to the question of how do you automate communication in such a way that people don't become numb to it? Yeah, I don't know. I honestly do not know. What I will tell you is I would automate less and put more of that communication on the people. And the reason I say that is, as a human species, we are built with communication as a primary function, meaning there are many ways that we communicate as humans, verbally, expressively, in our demeanor, in our body tone, all of that. And the reason we're built to communicate is because we're made to be in community, and community requires communication. We are not meant to be alone. We are not meant to be isolated. And that's where the function of a business really thrives, is you're bringing together people into a community. And what community requires is communication. So I believe in automation, and I think that you can accelerate things effectively, but I would be careful in automating everything, because it is a human function. And beyond, when you take it out of the human domain, then I think you lose a little something. It's probably not the answer you wanted to hear, but that's my belief and my experience, actually.
I mean, I understand that I have $1 billion question that I got to solve. That's a good enough question for me. That's a good enough answer.
Perfect.
Well, Kendall, thanks so much for hopping on. This was super valuable. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And I really wish you guys all the best in what you're doing, what you're building out, and in all of your scaling adventures.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.